Hi students. In this lesson we're going to work with Adobe InDesign and we're going to review how to set up a file structure for the semester, the basic tools within InDesign, how to set up a grid, creating a initial spread, importing imagery, how to work with basic typography, and then how to save and export and turn your file in for your grade. The first step I'd like you to do is set up your folder structure for design and type for this semester. I'd like you to make a DT Fall 18 folder. Now where you place that folder is completely up to you. It could be on your own external hard drive, it could be on the share space, or it could be on the hard drive of the computer you're currently on. All I care is that you have a basic folder structure that you can transport easily and then also be able to back up to Google Drive. In that D&T folder, what I'd like you to do is create a folder for BYOB, or Build Your Own Book, and then inside that I'd like you to have a folder called Links, and this is where all of your images for your illustration projects will go. So our next step is just to download the template file that we'll be working and building our book with. So under our week 1, assignment 1 on Canvas, you just want to go to the student resource, and a lot of times this will be what I'm referencing for template files, font files, and also any student examples that you want to work with this semester. So we just want to download this, and then it should show up in your downloads folder, and I want to take this file and transfer it into the BYOB folder, and we should be ready to go. Then all you have to do is double click that and open it up in InDesign. Okay, now that we have our book template open in InDesign, I just want to go over understanding the difference between InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop, and what their uses are. So each piece of software has a specific use. So InDesign is a tool that's used to do page layout. So anything that's a book that has multiple spreads to it, this is the tool you'll want to use. It's also the tool in the industry that they use for any type of publishing. And Illustrator is used for digital illustration, specifically on the vector side, but also can be used for poster, logo, things that are kind of one-page, one-off things. It hasn't really transitioned into being digital publishing yet. And then Photoshop is really used for digital illustration, but also for web design purposes. It's not really a page layout program, so you never would want to lay out a portfolio book in Photoshop. Okay, so that being said, let's go over the basic tools you need to know. InDesign is pretty similar to Illustrator and Photoshop. All Adobe tools are pretty streamlined, so the things you know in Photoshop pretty much transition into the things you'll need to know in InDesign. So on the left here, it's a tool palette that you're pretty used to seeing. The main tool we're going to use today is just the selection tool, which you've used in Photoshop and Illustrator before. And also on the right, oops, hang on one second. I just want to make sure everybody sees the same thing. So under Window, if you go to Workspace and set it to Essentials, it'll reset to make sure we're all looking at the same thing. So again, Window, Workspace, and Essentials. And also, if your InDesign, Photoshop, or Illustrator ever gets kind of buggy, you can always just reset your workspace and it should get things back to normal. So what we'll see and what we'll work with today in this lesson is pages, layers, and links. So what we downloaded is a 24-page book template. And this book template works with Blurb. And Blurb is a one-off online digital publisher. So you can build your book in this class and actually print it with this template, and it'll be in a really nice format, and we'll go through all of those specifics as we go through this project. So anyway, pages. It's pretty self-explanatory. These are your pages in your book. If you double click, it will jump to each section. You also can just scroll to see all of your page spreads. And one very useful key command that you need to know is if you hit Command plus, it'll zoom in. Command minus will zoom out. And I'm pretty sure that's the same thing in Photoshop, and it's definitely in Illustrator. So page template is just all the pages for your document. Layers is pretty straightforward. It's closer to Illustrator and how it works than Photoshop. The nice thing about how layers works in InDesign that's different than Photoshop is you don't need a layer for every single thing that you put on the page, and we'll kind of go through that. So right now your design goes here is a layer that you can put everything on, and it's easy to select all the different items. Underneath that is instructions, and this is for later on when we go to actually possibly produce your book. So it just goes through different guides and also what you need to know to print it. So let's just turn that off. And the last tool you need to know about is links. And when we actually import some of our work, it will have links to that work. So the folder structure that we set up, you want to keep in place, because if you move one of your image files, it breaks that link and has a hard time finding it. So this is what's different from Photoshop to InDesign. InDesign will link the work, where Photoshop will embed it, but it also will link it in the newest version. So just kind of knowing that we set up that folder structure, and once you put your images in it, you don't want to move those images. Oh, the grid. The grid is really graphic design 101. Ask any designer at the school or myself or faculty, and they'll tell you that it is the backbone to graphic design. So the big question is, why would you use a grid? And I'm going to keep it really simple right now, and as the semester goes on, we'll build into something more complex. The main reason you'll use a grid is to consistently present your artwork, and also typography, page numbers, titles, and so forth. So I'll give you a rough idea. If I was to bring in a piece of work, a vertical piece of work, and I set it to this size here that you can kind of see, from page to page, I would use this grid to make sure that I present a vertical piece of work the same way each time, so we don't change the size over and over again. What that does is it creates inconsistency, and it takes away from the overall presentation of your work. So really the grid is used to consistently present content, and the inconsistency really shows a lack of professionalism, but also it just becomes unorganized, and it tends to really take away from the presentation of your work. So let's talk about how to set up a grid. Currently you should see something of a 4-column and 4-row grid, and you can turn that on and off by hitting Command semicolon, which will turn your grid on and off. If you don't remember that key command, it's always under View, and bear with me, I don't always remember where these are at. Hide guides, and then it'll hide it, and then View, Show guides, and it'll turn it back on. So to create your own grid, or to actually edit the one we have, and I'm going to ask you not to edit it at this point in time, just so you get used to using it, and we'll go over how to do that a little bit later. There is a thing called, if you open your pages up, there's a concept called a master page. And what a master page does is allows you to create a template that then will import onto all pages. So if I put page numbers on my master page, like a 1 and a 2, it will put the numbers on every single page. So if I create a grid on my master page, then it will apply that grid to every single page that I make. So again, the master page really helps you with consistency of use of objects on the page. Now I know that's a little bit confusing, but bear with me as we start to build the book out, it'll start to make more sense. So in the use today, really what we want to do with the master page is be able to set up a grid. So if I double click, what it does is it goes inside the master page itself. And inside that, we can control the overall grid by going to create guides. And I'm just going to walk you through how I set this up, just in case you're building a book in the near future or you have to work with InDesign for another project. So if I just hit remove existing ruler and guides, those will disappear, but they'll also disappear on all of my pages as well. So again, the master pages control every single page. And again, if you want a consistent element on every single page, the master is what you want to use. So that being said, if I just want to create a 4 row, 4 column grid with a small gutter, all you have to do is make sure you have preview clicked on, and it will show the actual grid. And then I hit OK, and if I want to edit that grid at any time, I just come back into layout, create guides, and I can remove the existing one and go back in and rebuild it and hit OK. Or if I want to edit a specific line, I can come in and actually click and move those grid lines as well. So again, on the master, this allows you to control one page layout here, and then it applies it to every single spread. So that's how you set up a basic grid in InDesign. Okay, let's create our first spread for a project. Before we jump into importing your first piece, let's make sure that in Photoshop we check a couple things to make sure that it's print friendly. First and foremost, and I'm sure all of you have this, that it's set at CMYK. So if it is not, go under image and go under mode and make sure you set it to CMYK. The other major important thing is to make sure that the image size is at least 300 dpi and not a 2x2 thumbnail. So for this example, it's almost 6x8 in size at 300 dpi. And what we'll want to make sure we do is when we import this image into InDesign that we don't scale the image up, because we all know when we scale an image up, it actually pixelates that image and prints with little square patterns in it. So the main thing you want to make sure is that it's set at CMYK and that you have the largest image size possible so that you can scale down an image versus scaling up an image when you go to print it. I'm sure you all already know that, but I just have to make sure. So if we jump back over to InDesign, we'll want to select the second and third page to get started. And we're going to import our image, and that's really easy to do. You just go under File, Place, or if you hit Command D, and in your links folder, like we talked about, under your Build Your Own Book folder, under your Design and Type Fall 18 folder, this is where you want to place the pieces of work that you want to use in your book. So I'm going to select the image you just saw and hit open. You'll see this little, I don't know, placement. And once I click it, it will open it to scale. So this is the same size that it was created in Photoshop. Now, if you want to make the guides disappear, remember you hit Command semicolon and I'll turn it on and off. So what I want to do is zoom in a little bit and actually move this image so it's symmetrical with the page. And by doing so, you can see that a little pink line shows up when it's centered vertically. And also horizontally, and voila. So then you can see by using the grid, you can see the proportion here is all similar based on how it's framed, and then the negative space is equal on both sides here and also at the top. And what this does, if we turn our guides off, allows us to frame the piece just like you would mat it, clean and balanced as possible. We don't want to create any tension by, I don't know, putting it too high up and having kind of a irregular space. So again, consistent, symmetrical, and balanced is really what we're going for when we're presenting your piece. So if you import, let's say your image comes in and it's really big, something like this. You're like, hey, it's great, Alan. I imported at like 18 by 20. I got this huge image. How do I scale this down? Well, there's a couple different ways to do it. The easiest way is to actually hold Shift and Command and grab the corner, and you simply can drag. And what this does is it will scale it proportionally. And I'm pretty sure you can do this in Photoshop as well. So if you hit Shift and Command and drag it, you can see that now it's scaled it proportionally. You can also use the scale tool here, the scale up and down the imagery. Just make sure that your link constrains it. So if I turn this off, what it'll do is it'll distort the image, and we definitely don't want that. So again, make sure that it's always linked, and this is the other scale tool you can use. And there's even another way to import. You can draw a box like so. You can place it inside that box, and then under Object you can do fitting, and you can fit content proportionally and it'll fit it inside that frame, or you can do fit frame proportionally and it'll also fit it as well. So just like Photoshop and Illustrator, there's like 3 or 4 ways to do everything. I would advise the easiest way is to import your image, hold Shift and Command, and you can simply scale it to fit. So again, I'm just going to center it. You can see when it snaps. Turn off my guides. And even if I don't have the guides on, it'll still recognize that balance point. So that's our goal. We want to import a vertical piece and try to frame it as perfect as possible. We're not looking to fill the whole page. We're just looking for a nice standard that we'll use for all of our vertical pieces. And again, the key thing is always to look at a consistent margin and comfortable, balanced negative space. So now we're going to start to work with type. We have our image in place, and we need to add a title for that project and then also a description. And that description is really up to you. That project could be described as like what the assignment was and then how you approached it or how you executed it, or it could just be talking about the overall concept of the project. I think the most important thing when it comes to your writing is have a consistent tone to it, but also consistent in content. So how you write about this piece, let's say that I always say what the project is and then how I approached it. If I write about this piece that way, I'm going to write about every piece that way. So it's consistent in its story and its tone. You're not writing from like a schizophrenic point of view where each one has like a different writer for it. That's definitely what you want to avoid. So again, that's going to be the biggest challenge in getting this project started. It's not the layout, it's not the importing the image, it's not placing typography. It's how you want to talk about your pieces of work and finding that consistent voice and tone and content for each one. So that being said, I'll show you how to simply lay out some type. And again, this is going to be really basic, but as the weeks go on, I'll show you how to make different type selections, how to create a better hierarchy, how to add color to it, and how to make it look really nice. But today we're just going to go over how to import it and put it into place. And that's it. Nothing complex. Okay, so let's work with some type. The first thing we want to do is bring in our title for our project. So I'm gonna select the type tool and click and drag and come over to my text file, and the title for my project is Headman. And what I'd like everybody to work with on this type is to use Helvetica. So if I do Command A, I select the type, come up to the type menu up here, and I'll jump to Helvetica that way because I've been using it. Or you can just simply type H and it'll jump you to the Helvetica option. And then under Helvetica there's a lot of different options, bold, light, and we'll go over those, but for right now let's just set Helvetica to regular. And then I'm going to make sure I have a capital in there. And then lastly, anytime you want to change the size, you always have to make sure you select it. I'm going to make it 18 point just because I want it larger than my description text to set a basic hierarchy. So right now I've put my title in. We can see that it's floating above my grid line. So all we want to do is make sure that we drag it down so the lines to the bottom of that line. We can kind of drag this up as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to establish a what we call a flow line. So every time we have a title for a project on our future pages, like spread 4 and 5, 6 and 7, that it's always set on this line. So it's always in the same place versus, you know, what I've seen in the past is I'll have a student could have a title up here, then a student has the title down here, and it kind of goes all over the place. Again, this really takes away from the presentation of the work. So again, consistency. So now we have our title in place. It's set at 18 point, regular old Helvetica. I want to do is bring in my description text. And we talked about that description being completely up to you and what it talks about. But again, make sure the tone is consistent. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste in my text. So again, we're going to just keep using Helvetica. We're not trying to pick any style or tone yet. We'll go over that in the next couple weeks. I'll go over how to make this look really, really nice with color and the right type selection and all bunch of these little details. But for today, we're going to keep it really, really simple. So I'm going to select all that type. I'm going to again select Helvetica. Just make sure it's set at regular. And we're going to just use the default of 12 points, so that's the size, and 14-point leading, which is the height. And we'll go more into what leading is in future lessons. I'm going to hit the selection tool. And so when I have my type box select, if you see a little red plus here, that means that not all the type is in the box. All you have to do is simply drag it down. If you want your type box to be a little bit wider, you can drag it and it'll actually extend the width of the box. Reason I will keep it within this grid is just for clean presentation. Also, kind of a type 101 for everyone is just understanding line length, or what they call a character count. So in the presentation of our book here, a really good line length, and mainly this is for readability. If I have a line length that's like this long, it actually makes it a lot more challenging to read the content. So the best rule of thumb for line length is about 60 to 75 characters long, and we're somewhere in that range. So that's what we're really shooting for just in our first use of type today. So if I hit Command, semicolon, I can turn the grid off, and we see that our type, though it's just set in Helvetica and it's really basic, is clean, and our presentation of our image is really clean. So there's a few key commands just so you know how to turn everything on and off. You may have imported an image here and it looks really low res. So if we go under View and you look at display performance, you might hit Fast Display, and sometimes that pixelates this image. So if you happen to see that the display isn't showing it at the quality that you want, you can always come to View and set it to high quality display. Now obviously nothing really changed here, but sometimes that option is what you need to turn on. The other thing is overprint preview. If I turn that off, what you'll see is the actual boxes for everything that we can select. And lastly is our grid. So again, if we hit Command semicolon, we turn the grid on. If you want the overprint preview to turn on, you hold Shift, Option, Command, Y, and that will turn that on and off. So these are just some basic key commands, but also they're all under View. And now we have our first spread with a beautiful image framed properly, our title and paragraph text set, and we're ready to start to build our book. Okay, now we're ready to save our project and upload a PDF file to get our assignment grade. So this is pretty straightforward. The one thing I want everybody to be doing is practicing versioning of our project. So I want to go into File and do a Save As, and you have under BYOB your template. And what I want you to do is do a V1. And every time we do a new spread, I want you to save a version. And the main reason we do this is in case your file corrupts, unfortunately, at least you have a backup of that file based on a previous spread. So you don't lose everything. And this tends to happen a lot as you start to build out a book that has 20 some pages. Sometimes the file starts to become pretty large, and sometimes it accidentally corrupts. So I want everybody to get into a habit of saving versions of their file. So now that I have a version ready, next thing we want to do is go under File. We're going to go to Adobe PDF Presets, and we're going to go to smallest file size, and we're going to export the whole entire PDF. And again, I'm just going to put it in my folder here. I'm going to turn the extension on, and in our design and type, what we want to do is call it our username A1 and follow our naming conventions for the project. So if I copy and paste that over, it's going to be my username plus our initial assignment, and then book v1. We don't need all the extra PDF. We're just going to hit save. If this pops up, just say don't show again. And you're just going to do all the pages. Don't worry about it. They all will eventually fill in. I'm not going to grade off just because you have blank pages. Just makes it easier each class to turn in. So I'm just going to hit all and hit export. And up here the little timetable goes to show you. It went really quick this time, but it shows you a counter as it's creating the PDF file. So now what I want to do is go to our delivery, and we're going to hit section 1 here. It's going to open Google Drive, and you're going to have a D&T 18 and an assignment 1 or an A1. And what you want to do is drag and drop your file. Oop. Hang on, let me find it here. So my file name PDF, I'm just going to drag and drop it in here. And now I've turned in my project for a grade. This concludes our first lesson. We covered file structure, basic tools, how to set up a grid in InDesign, creating spreads, importing your imagery, and also how to work with the basics of type. And then finally, how to save and export your file to turn in for a grade. Hope this was really useful for everyone, and just have fun, and I wish you the best of luck on your first assignment.